7, she said, was her favorite number. It breaks all the rules, but that's just like her. It's prime and not even, yet to her it's significant as the number of days God used to speak life into existence. Now I know what you're thinking, and we can dispute over whether that's nonsense or whether it's the truth. But to her, 7 and life are further connected because 7 is the number of times that she tried to end it. Euthanasia, assisted suicide, medical aid in dying, these are terms we use for justifying, for lying and deceiving, concealing and hiding. We hide from truth and reality. We call it dying with dignity, but what we're really doing is sanitizing suicide. The year is 2015 and the Supreme Court made a grave mistake. It ruled that my choice of death should be facilitated by the state, yet before, on, and since that fateful day, our society has been embroiled in a heated debate. So for your benefit and for your sake, I share with you the story of pain and self-hate because too much is on the line and too much is at stake, and we need to listen before it's too late. In the streets, pro-euthanasia groups raise their voices. They protest and lobby, speaking with passion and poise. They rally behind concepts like compassion and choice. They say that suffering people should be able to die when they choose, and so even if we should talk about elder abuse, they say that safeguards will protect against misuse. And besides, who am I to oppose somebody's personal views? Now, I'm all for compassion and choice, and I'm all for bodily autonomy, but the debate about medical aid in dying is about more than personal liberty. The Supreme Court decision and subsequent laws don't just permit death with dignity, but they make my choice of death the government's responsibility. So you see, the narrative is not as simple as it seems. Dying with dignity is more problematic than you can believe, because what we're already starting to see is medical aid in dying being accessed by suicidal teens. Over time in other jurisdictions, there's been a gradual progression, and while it's premised on choice and compassion, it's resulted in the decline in suicide prevention and ultimately the elimination of those struggling with depression, almost like a mass suicide of my generation. And you're welcome to question, and you're welcome to disagree, and perhaps you're simply not convinced by me. Maybe you still think that this is really about ending agony and about ending suffering that's entirely unnecessary. And to that I would say, who gets to decide? Who gets to choose who lives and who dies? Who gets to say that my pain is insufficient but the pain of my friend is qualified? Any definition we create is arbitrary, built on subjective understandings of human dignity, but our laws create a distinction, a tangible division premised on ideas like bodily autonomy. So let me tell you a story about autonomy. Let me tell you about what happens when self-hatred is permitted to run free. Let me tell you about a girl who would have died had she been permitted to access assisted suicide. She was born in the middle of fall, which is coincidentally her favorite season. She was born in the number 18, which is good for a different reason. As a kid, she was headstrong and free. She was content to do puzzles and pick strawberries. She would sit for hours on end and just read. And if you ask her, she would say cheekily that as a kid, she was innocent and sweet, although I'm sure some days her parents disagreed. She enjoyed playing baseball with her siblings and her dad in a local neighborhood park. And brilliant in school, her favorite subjects were English, math, drama, and art. Now my friend is somebody that looks like you and me. Somebody who as a child was content and pleased until that fateful day at the age of 14 when depression consumed her. It made itself her ruler and instilled in her the desire to drink poison willingly. Depression overcame my friend without a trigger or an explanation. It gave her no hint or no clue or no sense of justification. It drained her world of color and stole her ability to cry, and it remained cruelly silent whenever she asked, why? She built cobweb cages to keep it in, but somehow the depression would always win, and over time she lost sight of her enemy and eventually stopped fighting the darkness within. And so through a haze of an insanity-induced hypnosis, she gave herself a judgment, one final diagnosis. She judged herself guilty, unworthy of breath, and so tired of life, she sought out death. People told her about help and about hope, but hatred filled and inhabited her bones. And she no longer felt safe on her own, so when people asked her how they could be kind, this is what she would want to say every single time: euthanize me, help me, please end my pain and misery. But if you truly care, you won't listen to me, because suicide is not a death with dignity. Euthanize me. These are the words that people never could see, but they were words that were engraved in her psyche, embedded in her identity, engraved in her history. They were words that she thought, but she never dared say, so they were words that she would write in the dying light of day. They were words that she thought would bring an end to her pain, and every so often when she'd fallen, she'd whisper those words softly: please, please, just euthanize me. Her mind was filled with paralyzing fear. She saw no point in running because death was so near, and even if she ran, she knew she couldn't escape because hell was empty and all the devils were here. At night, she would lie awake, and sometimes she would try to pray, and ever so softly, she would finally say, may you show me how to tie myself into a rope and make a noose designed to choke off the breath invading my corrupted throat. Amen to whoever's listening. To be clear, she did try to die. In fact, she attempted 7 times, and while by then she was quite skilled at lying, thankfully, she never did succeed at dying. Now it's been well over 5 years, and she's learned how to overcome her fears. And on days when she struggles and on days when she cries, she's learned how to hide her pain and her tears. From time to time, she relives her pain, wishing for permission to go insane. And while she continues to fight and to cling to hope and to life, depression still stalks her in the darkness of night. Depending on the time of day, depending on the strength of the pain, depending on the noise inside of her brain, if you look at her and ask her what will make her okay, her eyes may still look at you and say, "Euthanize me. Help me. Please end my pain and misery." Yet if you truly care, you won't listen to me, because suicide is not a death with dignity. Now today, she's relearned how to breathe, and she does what she can to help others in need. She spends as much time as she can with a little brother, and she dreams one day of becoming a mother. In her free time, she paints and she writes, hoping to fill the world with beauty and light. She's finished university and she's pursuing a career, and she grows more resilient with each passing year. So to her, I say, I'm glad that you failed, because now you're still here and you've conquered your hell. And when your kids ask about the scars on your arm, I hope you can tell them they're from a battle I won. Suicide prevention versus suicide assistance. This is the truth of the debate that we're faced with. What happens to those who hate their existence? Do we give them hope, or do we give them pills and permission? If death with dignity is really about autonomy, if medical aid in dying is really about human dignity, then for intellectual consistency, arguably, that denying it to the depressed is hypocrisy. And some already believe that assisted suicide should be allowed in all situations, that choice and autonomy are the most important considerations, that the most loving thing to do for people struggling with depression is to give in to suicidal ideation and call it compassion. But I ask you to think about the inevitable devastation, about the impact that that decision would have on my generation. Because if suffering is the only threshold for a death that's government sanctioned, then we have truly created a world of hopelessness and desolation. So if we take assisted suicide to its logical end conclusions, if we permit it for all, even those facing psychological confusion, then our intellectual consistency will lead to epidemic levels of death, unprecedented loss of life, and the snuffing out of innocent breath. So forgive me, but I'm wary of a pro-euthanasia policy that would fulfill the suicidal fantasies of youth even younger than me. Some say euthanasia will reinforce life's quality and dignity, but every suicidal teen in my community and every individual in the position that my friend used to be may perceive assisted suicide as a legal guillotine designed to end the suffering that society renders unseen. And so you might disagree, but if you do, I dare you to answer this question. If somebody wants to die, who gets to decide if they get suicide assistance or prevention? People speak of rules and regulations, checks and balances, safeguards and limitations, but what society lacks is imagination to comprehend the desperation that used to compel my friend to pursue every avenue she knew would prevent her from drawing the unwanted breath that she drew. So when we talk about assisted suicide, this is the unpleasant, undeniable reality. We have to consider these stories of tragedy. We must consider those facing vulnerability. We have to consider the lives that would have been lost. We have to question the rhetoric, and we have to count the cost. The truth is, it's easier to offer death than it is to offer hope, especially when somebody's suffering and at the end of their rope. But instead of helping people stop the breath in their own throats, we must teach them how to overcome and learn how to cope. We believe that regardless of the individual and regardless of life circumstances, everybody deserves suicide prevention, because everybody deserves second chances. Euthanasia, assisted suicide, medical aid in dying. Next time you hear those words, think about that friend of mine. Think about those who struggle to feel safe in their own mind. Take the time, talk to them, be attentive, and be kind. Because when somebody wants to die, things are not always as they seem. So take heed and consider what they might truly need. Teach them to overcome and learn to lead. Teach them to be resilient and to succeed. And I promise you that you'll see that suicide prevention is the answer. That love is more powerful than death, and that hope is what we must offer people until someone's natural, final breath. When we spoke about numbers, she asked me my favorite. And it took me longer than I thought that it would to pick it, but finally I told her my favorite number is 4, because in the end, I promise you there will be joy.